Hello, everybody. This is Cascaded Composers Presents. Composer tonight is insights from David Jones, who has going to be presenting for us, writing for the horn and horn ensembles. And thank you, David, for being here. And it's all yours.
All right, pleasure to be here. Um, Let me just make sure I'm gonna share screen with y'all. It seems to be letting me. Uh, all right, so as some of you might have heard about, um, I um, am kind of leading a independent curated concert that's going to be happening in June. That is focused on horn ensemble, specifically uh, focused primarily on horn quartet, but can also include um, uh, other variations of horn ensembles, some larger ensembles or smaller ensembles. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about uh, a little bit about the horn and some characteristics of the horn and different tricks that you can use on the horn, and um, and some things to be aware of when you're writing for the horn and writing for horn ensembles. The horn quartet is based primarily out of orchestral tradition. uh, and most orchestral writing uses a quartet of horns. Um, and as you see here in this is the organ symphonies horn section. Um, I don't see Jeff Garza there, so this might have been taken before he got there. But um, uh, because the horn quartet plays so much repertoire in the orchestra, then it's kind of developed as its own little side genre, the of the horn quartet. Um, so um, I have my horn here with me, so I can demonstrate a few things. Um, I wanted to start first with um, the just the horn's range. The horn actually has one of the widest ranges of all of the brass instruments, um, and you'll have to let me know if you can hear this. Okay, let me see. Whoops. Sorry, one moment. I'm going to stop my share for just a second so that I can turn original sound for musicians on, so that way you can actually hear me play. Can you still hear me talking okay?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right, sharing the screen again. So let me know if you can hear this all right.
It's
Okay?
good.
It's not terribly distorted or anything.
So far, it's okay.
We probably should have done that sound check before we got started, but here we are. So the horn's range can go really on the low end. You can go as low as, so here's the this middle C here. All the way down to that low C. This is considered kind of the low end of the standard range of the horn, but the horn really can go as low as cuts down to this low E here, written, and then even a little bit lower down to what we call fundamental C. That's about the bottom of my range. And so down this low, you can see that I created this chart in Dorico, and Dorico's flagging those notes as, oh, that's too low. Well, too low for a lot of players, but some players, myself included, kind of specialize down in that low range. But the lowest practical range is probably somewhere around here. That low E, low F is, at least I can hit those fairly consistently. And then the high range, and we'll see how well I can do right now. Just finished a rehearsal, so I might be a little bit chopped out, but here's that middle C again. This range here between the middle C and that F. As you can hear, it sounds fine in that range, but that range can be just a little bit muddy and a little bit hard to play very loud in. Obviously, we practice and train to still be able to play a full dynamic range even in that weird muddy register, but just know that it can be a little squishy in that register. And then this upper mid range is what I call kind of the hero range of the horn, and that's about from the F in the staff to the top of the staff. This range, I call it the hero range because it's where the horn has its most characteristic heroic sort of sound, and most horn solos that you hear in orchestral repertoire and in movie music, most of them sit in about that range. Because the horn can project well in that range, and we can get super brassy or super lyrical. The horn not only has a large not only has a large range in terms of pitch, but also a large range in terms of kind of dynamic contrast and color. We can play fairly soft, not as soft as like clarinets or strings. If we're having a quiet battle, the clarinets win for sure. But we can still play fairly soft and lyrical and have very expressive melodies, like the famous melody from Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. Or we can play very heroic and sweeping marcato melodies, like from the Lord of the Rings. So the horn can be quite bright and quite loud, especially in that hero range, or it can be very soft and tender. So we've got a considerable dynamic range. The high range, I put on here a little note to be careful of this range. And professional hornists are trained to play in this range, but it can be a little fraught. That range, the partials become closer together, and so it can be more. It can be really easy to miss notes up in that register, but we really can't. We can fairly consistently play up to that high C. Some hornists, I probably can't today, but some hornists can even play like super, super high and up to high Ds and high Es. Hey, I got a high D today. But some hornists are high range specialists and can play really consistently in that high register. Other hornists, like myself, are more low range specialists and focus more on the low register. So I say you want to be careful on that range, just because this range can be very taxing, and hornists can. It's easier to make mistakes and crack notes up in this register. Not to say that you can't write in that register. It can sound really beautiful and heroic up in that register. But a lot of pieces will tend to only have a few notes up in this range. Like a lot of pieces will maybe have, they'll save this register of the horn for very climactic moments. And they'll only have like 2 or 3 of them in a solo piece, or something to that effect. As long as you stick to this range, you're probably going to be in good shape. One other thing I was going to say about that. Even sitting on top of the staff, like up here, up in the D, E, F range up here, Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker is notorious for this. He's got the horns up there, especially the first horn, that poor first horn, up there playing high F sharps for very long periods of time, like. There's even a meme out there of Tchaikovsky going like, "I'm gonna kill you, horns, 1 F sharp at a time." Even just sitting up in that range for a long period of time can be extremely taxing and tiring, and just wear the player out. And so, just again, play around with it, but be careful of that high register. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that the horn parts are written in F, and so they'll sound a perfect fifth lower than what's written. So you'll notice that while here this hero range is mostly just stay in the staff, and then once you're above the staff, then that's up in the high register. If you set your notation software to display in concert pitch, then everything's going to look lower than it actually is. That top of the hero range is just right here on the middle line of B flat and in concert pitch. And so some people will have their notation software set in concert pitch, and they'll write parts for the horn player, and then they'll print off the horn part, and it'll their notation software will retranspose it back into F for us, and they'll be like, oh, well, I stayed in the staff, it's all good, and then it'll transpose it back into F, and suddenly everything is way up here in the stratosphere, and we're just like, no, thank you, try that again. So that's just something to be aware of, is that because of the horn's transposition sounding a fifth lower than what it's written, you just want to be careful that you're not accidentally writing too high for the horn. Something that I was going to mention, and I forgot to put it in this slideshow, so I'm just going to pull up Dorico real quick. Let's see, let's just do it here. This is just a note about using bass clef. So professional horn players can read in both treble and bass clef. Don't write anything for tenor clef or alto clef for us. We won't like that. But we can read treble clef and bass clef fairly fluently. Most of what we play is in treble clef, but so we're used to reading quite a few ledger lines, even sometimes all the way down to here to the low C, which again sounds, this is that low C. We're used to reading ledger lines that low, especially if it's just for like an isolated note. Like a lot of horn parts will do something like, or they'll just go down to like that low C just for one note or so. And it's fine to write it in treble clef, but if you're spending a long time down in this register, I would say if you're spending a long time between 3 and 4 ledger lines, then that's when we're going to want you to change that more extended passage into bass clef. And again, we can read so that middle C is that same middle C is up here in the bass clef, and this is that low C, and we can read clear all the way down here to that low F and low E, and even a little bit lower than that. What becomes annoying, though, is if players write, if they switch to bass clef and then they start writing a lot of stuff 3 or 4 ledger lines above the bass clef, then we're like, that's too many ledger lines. Then we have to squint and start counting ledger lines, and at that point, if you start going that high, then please just switch it back to treble clef. The highest I like to read in bass clef is the is F4, or the F at the bottom of the treble clef staff. If you get much higher than that, then we start giving you dirty looks. So at that point, just switch back to treble clef. Coming back to this, so a couple of things to keep in mind when writing for the horn. One good rule of thumb that I've heard and that I like to use is to treat us like singers. To treat writing for the horn, and this goes for other brass instruments as well, but treat writing for the horn much the same way as you would treat writing for voice, writing for solo voices. If you can sing it, then we can probably play it. So a lot of horn parts tends to be relatively stepwise, stepwise or conjunct, with occasional leaps to with occasional leaps. That sort of melodically thinking writing tends to work really well on our instruments. If you've got a passage that has lots of really wide leaps, what we like to lovingly refer to as squeak fart music, then that becomes not impossible, but more difficult. And we do practice and we do train to be able to play fairly large leaps. Beethoven is infamous for, especially in his second horn parts, he's infamous for writing a lot of very wide leaps for that poor second horn player, oftentimes jumping in and out of the low register. So, we can do fairly wide leaps, and we do a considerable amount of practicing, so don't be too afraid of writing a lot of leaps. But, stuff like that, that's like... Just know that we're probably going to miss quite a few notes. When you're approaching the high register, again, this highest register, just like when you're approaching it with a voice, we can sometimes just nail high notes just out of the blue, and sometimes we're asked to do that in a lot of orchestral repertoire, like in the Ein Heldenleben solo at the beginning of Strauss's Ein Heldenleben. At that point he asks us to nail a high B flat just out of the blue, and you can tell I didn't nail it just now, but so we can pick notes out of nowhere up in the high register, but it's harder, and there's a good chance that we'll miss and crack the note. But generally, if you approach those high notes in a more stepwise manner, then it becomes easier for us to get to work our way up into that register, just like with a singer, or sometimes even just approaching them with an octave leap sometimes can be effective, especially if you approach that leap in contrary motion. So, like, for example, if you're stepping down, if you're approaching that leap up into the high range in contrary motion, then that can be relatively easy for us to play. And just like with singers, if you use a dissonant interval to get up into the high register, that like a seventh or a tritone, that can be a little bit more difficult to hear and a little bit difficult to nail, but or sometimes we do get asked to do weird stuff like that, but it can just be a little bit harder for us. So generally, thinking lyrically for the horn is a good thing to keep in mind. We're also effective at blending and filling in harmonies, which can be good for what I like to call transparent scoring. Oftentimes you'll hear horns sustaining the horn section sustaining a chord underneath another instrument, like a solo woodwind, like a solo clarinet or solo flute, who has melody over the top of those chords. And the horn's pretty good at having just a transparent sound where you can hear the harmony, but we're not burying what's happening underneath us. Um, Horns are fairly agile. We can play pretty fast scales and arpeggios. Not that. Or arpeggios like. We can play, especially in small bursts, we can play pretty fast and agilely, but we're not quite as fast as as woodwind instruments or string instruments. If you ask us to play monster scale from, which I see in a lot of string music, if you ask us to play a huge scale and 30-second notes from the bottom of the range all the way to the top of the range, which is easy enough to do on a violin, we might have a little bit of a harder time playing that quite that fast on the horn. And at some point, if you ask us to write something or to play a scale too fast, we'll probably just kind of fake it and glissando through it. But we've got some pretty good agility to us. Horns are also pretty accustomed to rapid tonguing. We can double tongue and triple tongue. Double tonguing, so single tonguing about the fastest that I can play rapid notes is probably about. That's at a good single tongue, but then we can double tongue using two different parts of the tongue, a t and alternating between a t and a k sound for something like. We can play fairly fast repeated notes, or triplet tonguing, which is kind of the same thing but in sets of 3. That becomes a little more virtuosic and more difficult to do if you're asking us to, for example, double tongue a scale, like. That can become a little bit harder to do. We can still do it to a certain degree, but the easiest for us to do is to do rapid tonguing on just repeated notes. Something to keep in mind as far as phrasing goes is that horn players, like other wind instruments, we need to breathe, so I can play fairly lengthy phrases. That was all in one breath. But like singers and like other wind instruments, we do need to breathe, and so oftentimes what I'll see less skilled composers do is put like repeated passage, or if you see something like the Bach violin partita or the cello suites or something, where you've got just a steady stream of 16th notes that continues for like forever. That's something that's easy for a violinist or a cellist to do, because they don't have to breathe to play their instrument. Of course they still breathe, but they can just keep sawing away forever and ever and ever, and so they don't need to pause between their long drawn out 16th note passages. If you were to give something similar to a horn player, I've played the some of the Bach cello suites before, and we can do it, but just expect that we're going to need to like leave out a note or two here and there in order to be able to take a breath and keep going. Another very important thing to keep in mind is to give us a rest. um, a lot of composers will have all the horns playing all the time, and it's exhausting. um, the Sibelius's Second Symphony is a primary example of something that those horn parts are just absolutely exhausting, because he's got all four horns kind of up in that up in this the top of the hero range for holding sustained chords for a long time, and it just wipes us out. And so it's really important to give us time not just to rest our chops, especially between really difficult or really intense passages, or especially if they're really intense passages up in that higher register. We need some time to be able to rest in order to recover a little bit before being expected to play more fortissimo high register stuff. We also need time to, all the string players and pianists out there, this is your opportunity to go, ooh. But we get a lot of water that collects in the horn, and hornists actually take quite a bit more time to empty our slides and stuff than other brass instruments. We do have a spit valve, and so in a pinch we can just kind of blow out a little bit and be at least get most of it out and be good to go for the next passage. But if we want to clear all of the water out and avoid getting that kind of crackling sound that that you get if you get a lot of water built up in the horn, then we need some time to be able to empty out the toilet, as I like to call it. And so it's important, even in quartet writing, where it's a much smaller ensemble and much there's not other sections of the orchestra that can cover for us while we're not playing. It's still important to reduce the texture a little bit every now and then to give each player time to rest and time to empty the horn before playing again. I can show you a couple of fun effects that you can do on the horn. Some of the standard timbral effects that you can do with the horn is use mutes. The standard is to just use a straight mute, which ends up sounding something like this. Something important to keep in mind is that we can, it's called a mute, but we're trained to blow through the mute, and so you can still write fairly loud passages, like you can still write fairly loud passages with the mute, and so its primary purpose isn't to make the horn quieter, but it's to change the timbre of the horn. Now, unlike other brass instruments, which use a whole milieu of different mutes, like straight mutes and cut mutes and harmon mutes and all kinds of weird stuff, the horn only has the one mute, the straight mute. Though I have experimented a little bit with using other non-standard mutes. I've used a glass jar before as a mute. I didn't bring one tonight, but that can get a really interesting sound. I haven't tried this myself, but I've seen someone use a traffic cone as a mute. There's different things that you can try playing around with. Dai Fujikura, who's a Japanese composer, has the hornist borrow a trombone harmon mute in order to get a wah-wah effect. That's not standard, but it is possible. And he uses it to great effect in both his horn concerto and a solo piece called Pollo Pollo. The other standard special effect that horns can do is stopped horn, where you normally our normal position is to just kind of rest the hand in the bell. The stopped horn, but you can tell I'm still leaving quite a bit of space open for sound to get through. Stopped horn is where you close your hand over the bell entirely and seal that, which ends up sounding more like this. It's much brighter, more nasally sound. It tends, stopped horn especially, even more than muted horn, tends to be a little bit softer of a sound than the open sound, and so that's something to keep in mind when trying to match volume with other instruments. If you've got, for example, a stopped horn trying to match with an oboe or another woodwind instrument, we're going to have to play that stopped passage fairly loud in order to be at the same volume as the oboe. Stopped horn is very often used as kind of an echo effect. This is from Eugene Botza's En Forêt. So you can hear how the stopped horn is kind of used just as like a distant echo. One thing that's important to consider when you're writing stopped horn, the way to do it is either to just write a plus over each note that you want stopped, or if it's a more extended passage, you can just write stopped for the stopped stuff and then write open again when you want us to play it open without the stopped effect. An important point is that when you write stopped horn, it requires us to finger everything down a half step. Now, you don't have to worry about this. You notate the pitch however you want it to sound, but just know that we're going to compensate for that by fingering everything down a half step. So here's a open C in the middle of the staff. In order to play it stopped, I have to then finger a B, but it'll come out as a C. So the only reason that you need to keep that in mind is that it requires a significant amount of brain power to finger everything down a half step while we're playing stopped horn. And so if you've got like an entire page that is all stopped horn, and it's all extremely fast stuff, all stopped horn, that's going to be real scary, and it's going to take a lot of practice to be able to get that down. And so stopped horn is best to save as a special effect, and don't write everything stopped. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you favor keys, like sharp keys, flat keys? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, like other band instruments, so the horn is notated in F, and so F major is a pretty good key for us. We tend to favor flat keys a little bit more. but so like F major is a great key. B flat major works well. E flat major is fantastic. A flat, D flat. Um, if you We can handle G flat major okay. C flat major starts to get a little bit scary, and I'm talking concert pitch with these. Um, uh, uh, a little bit scarier are the sharp keys are a little bit scarier. We can usually handle uh, C major, G major, and D major just fine. And I mean, to be honest, we can play all 24 major and minor keys. But yeah, we tend to favor the flat keys over the sharp keys. Um, Another thing to mention about that I didn't put in this presentation, but uh, traditionally, because the horn was originally constructed without valves, um, you'll see in a lot of older orchestral music that it's written without a key signature and using accidentals instead of the key signature. And the reason for that is because until like the mid 19th century, when valves started to become a thing on horns, especially in 18th and early 19th century music, the composer would just write the horn part in C, but then indicate what crook they wanted us to use. Horns used to, before they had valves, they used to just have different lengths of tubing that you would add to the horn in order to get our harmonic series to play in a certain key. Now that's accomplished with the valves, but for example, playing just in F, we can get that whole range of pitches just on the open horn without pressing any of the buttons. And if back in the day, if you wanted to play instead in E, then you would just take out your F crook and stick in an E crook, and then you would have access to a different harmonic series. And so for that reason, composers would just write the horn part in C, but then they would indicate what transposition they wanted, essentially which crook they wanted. And so we could switch out a crook in order to play in C or in E flat or in G and whatnot. And so for that reason, even when the composer indicates a key signature for all the other instruments, very often they will not include a key signature for the horn and include accidentals for everything. And so because of that, because we're just kind of used to seeing that in orchestral music, a lot of hornists prefer not to have a key signature at all, even if the piece is tonal. A lot of us prefer to just read accidentals. Now, we still can read key signatures, but I personally would much rather just see everything written out in accidentals than using a key signature. Did that answer your question?
It did. I have another question.
Uh-huh.
So I was looking at some quartet music, kind of getting ready for this, and noticed that it looked like for the horn quartets, the parts for the four horns, they're listed like high, less high, lower, lowest, like SATB sort of
Okay.
in the score rather than how you would do it for orchestral horn parts.
Yeah, I'll get into writing for quartet in just a minute. But yes, I mean that kind of depends on the composer or the arranger. I prefer to see and most quartet music actually will be the same as it is in orchestral, where it's high low high low. first and third being high horn parts, and second and fourth being low horn parts. But some composers or some arrangers will still write it will just write it SATB, high, kind of high, low, lowest. Uh, so that part just kind of depends on preference. Mary, looked like you had a question.
Yeah. Early on when you were discussing the ranges and you gave a caution about the range that you said could be muddy, and then when you demonstrated it and you played loud, it actually sounded terrific. And I think you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
saying the opposite. And so it did seem to me that actually playing in that range, for lack of any better word, I'll call it louder, and seemed to override the concerns. Is that fair, or was that something weird
That's
that
fair.
happened?
That's fair. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just giving it as a bit of a warning. It can be kind of a muddy register and kind of hard to get sound through in that register. But like I said, we do a lot of practicing and a lot of training to be able to overcome that.
And do you think
Um,
the dynamics itself help? I mean, because this is also true of singing. Certain things are easier if one is singing louder, certain ranges. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, um, that muddiness can be overcome, and as you said, it can sound fantastic in that register. Um, but it's a little bit harder to sound fantastic in that register,
Okay.
if you will.
Okay. It's just you. My other question, and just tell me if it's getting, I know you have still your presentation to do, if this is still relevant. How important do you think it is for a composer to understand about tonguing? What my secret question really is something I wrote once. It was also for trumpet as well. If you
Hmm.
wanted more definition in the sound, the players are playing very lyrically, and I wasn't sure what to do in the notation. And then I started reading a lot about tonguing. So
Hmm.
I wondered about notation that would help on individual notes besides tenuto marks or portato or portamento, or should we be thinking about tonguing? And is this, yeah, that's my question, if it's appropriate.
I'd say more just thinking about articulation. You know, if you
Yeah.
words like marcato or staccato or as you said tenuto. You know, just being real specific about what articulation markings you use will help guide us as to how we're going to tongue a particular passage. And yeah, I mean, if you write legato, for example, if you write a slurred passage, then we're not going to tongue at all. We're going to tongue the first note at the start of the slur, and then we're going to not tongue for the rest of them, so that way we can get very smooth, connected sound. If you want us to play if you want us to tongue every note but have them still be somewhat connected, then you write something like legato, um, and then we can do something like that's using more of a D articulation, da 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 da, versus we usually use more of a ta articulation, ta 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 ta. And so if you write legato, then yeah, we'll use a little bit softer of the tongue in order to achieve that more legato sound, but we'll still tongue the notes. Versus if you write something like marcato, then yeah, we'll
Right.
definitely use much more of a stronger t sound. You know, marcato, or if you use accents. So I would just be very particular about what articulations you use, and you can also help guide us just using expressive text to let us know kind of what character you're going for, and we'll try and match our tonguing style to that character.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hmm. Um, Kind of coming back to the topic of muting. An important thing to keep in mind is that mute Speaking of muting, I got muted for some reason.
My mistake, sorry. I meant to spotlight you and I hit the wrong thing. Sorry.
Whoops.
Yeah.
So an important thing to keep in mind is that mute changes take time. It's important to give us at least a few seconds in order to change from a muted to an open sound. Now, a lot of hornists have this fancy little wrist strap here, and so we'll keep the mute. If there's a lot of back and forth or quick mute changes, then we'll keep the mute just here on our wrist while we're playing, we can do fairly quick mute changes if we've got the strap on our wrist. But even then, it takes us a second or two to make the change. Now, changing from stopped to open, we can do very quickly because that's just covering the hand over the bell. So we can do stuff like. We can make that change fairly rapidly. If you've got a lot of switching back and forth between open and stopped, then that can add quite a bit to the complexity of, add quite a bit to the difficulty. But we can make pretty quick changes from stopped to mute, or sorry, from stopped to open. We can even do some pitch bends by making a gradual change from open to stop, like. One of the things about that, so if you you can bend the pitch downward just with the hand by up to about a half step. One of the strange things about it, though, is once you seal the bell all the way, then and get the stopped effect, once you reach that fully stopped position, then that'll actually sound a half step higher than what you're fingering. So it'll bend down to up to a half step, but then once you reach that full stop position, then it jumps up to being a half step higher than fingered. It's kind of an odd thing, but there's, I don't know, something about physics and having a tube that's closed on one end versus having a tube that's open on both ends.
David, a question about that?
Yeah.
Does anybody try to do stuff like whole tone, not trills exactly, but whole tone alternation by jumping back and forth between stopped and nearly stopped? Or is that just weird?
Actually, back before horns had valves, that was our MO, was using stopped horn in order to get those pitches in between. So, like, I can pretty well play a scale without using the fingers at all.
Yeah.
And so that's how horn players just used to have to be able to play scales, was using the hand in order to get the notes in between those partials. So yeah, I mean, you can do fairly. You can do some kind of weird stuff with the with switching back and forth between open and stopped. A very common technique is to start stopped and then very quickly move from stopped to open. So then you get this. I've seen a lot of, like, maulers use that quite a bit. It happens in Borodin's Polovichian dances. It's a fun effect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh. One other thing to note is that stopped horn is only practical in from the middle C above. We can play a little bit lower than that. Yeah, see, I can play it okay up to the written G below the staff. Much lower than that, though. It gets real muddy down there and inconsistent. So it's most effective in this range. But we can play it up to the high range pretty well. There's a Camille Saint-Saëns romance that goes, it's this nice arpeggio up and then a pianissimo stopped high B. That's like, and it's kind of a nice effect. We're also famous for sounding like elephants, for our glissandi. And glissandi is basically just sliding through the harmonic series really fast, blowing through a lot of partials at a really fast rate. They're most effective in that mid-high hero range. And glissandi up tends to work better than glissandi down, though we can do glissandi downward. It's most effective in that high range because when you get down into the low range, like if you were to try to gliss from a low B to mid-range B, so the from this B down here up to this B up here. Well, there's only one partial in between those two notes, and so there's not really any room to glissando in between those. It doesn't get the same effect. But when you get up into this range up here, then there's plenty of partials in there to just rip through. There's someone in the chat. Just wanted to take a look at that. Thanks, Liz. Another thing to mention is trills. We can do two different kinds of trills. We can do valve trills, which are more similar to what woodwind instruments do, which is like trilling between two fingered notes. Or what's more unique to the horn is what's called a lip trill, where you're it's essentially just a really fast lip slur, slurring really fast between two adjacent partials. Lip trills will always be a whole step trill. Lip trills are only really effective in the upper to mid range. And the reason for that is because the partials are closer together in that range. In that range, the trills are all a whole step apart, and it's because the partials are very close together in that range, just a whole step apart in that range, and so it's easy to just go back and forth between them. If you try and do, for example, a trill between a middle C and a D, that's less practical because there's no partial on a D with the same fingering. So it's there's nothing in between that C and that E on the same fingering, and so we can trill between the C and the E. Again, that range is a little muddy, so it can be tricky to get there, but yeah, we can trill fairly readily. Some people can even trill between like a G below the staff and the middle C, like. Again, you're just trilling between adjacent partials, and the partials are farther apart the lower you get. Some people can even do between a low G and a low C. You can tell that trill is more unwieldy. So lip trills, which are always a whole step, most effective in the upper range. Valve trills, we can only do a half-step trill with the valves, not a whole step trill, and they're only possible when the player can trill the second, or can move the second valve up and down. So like, and this you can do pretty much through the full range of the horn, but only between certain notes. Like we can do, here's that low D that you can see on the slide. Or the low E. But not between the, not for example between the low F and the low F sharp, because it requires us to move too many fingers at a time. Or between the G sharp and the A. Again, between B flat and B is not possible because it's alternating between using first finger and using second finger. We can kind of do it, but it's unwieldy. Or C sharp to D. Again, B flat to B is a no-no because it's moving from first finger to second finger. So yeah, I mean, and you can see the full list there. There's quite a wide variety of valve trills that you can do, but just know that there are some that are not practical. Something that can be kind of fun is multiphonics. Most horn players can't do multiphonics, but some can. I can do some. And multiphonics on the horn, unlike with woodwind instruments where they just use a special fingering in order to kind of be in between two notes at the same time, brass players do multiphonics by playing and singing at the same time. Playing and humming into the instrument at the same time. This tends to work best when you're playing a really low note and then singing something above that. So like, especially singing a perfect consonance above that. So for example, he was playing a really low F and then singing an F above that. Or he was singing a octave and a fifth above that. I don't know how well this is coming through on Zoom, but he was singing an octave and a third above. And we can move around a little bit with that, so this is like moving in parallel thirds, or parallel tenths. It's a little hard to do, but and so it's good to use as a as a special effect, but you definitely don't want to write an entire page or an entire piece just with multiphonics, because it's going to take a lot of practice. Yeah, Jeff.
Was it my imagination, or did adding the voice actually disturb the tone quality of the low note that you were playing?
It does, yeah.
That was really interesting.
Especially, so perfect consonances like perfect fifths and perfect octaves tend to be the most stable. Thirds and sixths are possible, but yeah, they affect the tone quality of the low note itself. And they kind of like fuse together a little bit. And you can even use dissonances, like here's a fourth, or an octave plus a fourth. Or here's a tritone. Or you can tell dissonant intervals really affect the and really kind of interfere and meddle with the played pitch. So the easiest are perfect consonances. I've done something before where I've played parallel fifths with myself. Kind of fun to play around with, but again, it's not a technique that your average horn player will be able to do reliably.
Got it. Thank you.
That brings me to scoring for horn ensemble itself. As Xelana pointed out, so in traditional orchestral writing, usually you've got two high-low pairs. You've got first and second horn, which are paired together as a high horn and a low horn, and you've got third and fourth horn that are paired together as a high horn and a low horn. And so, as you can see in the way I have this F major chord scored over here, oftentimes the first horn will play the highest parts, and then the third horn will play the next highest parts, then second horn will play the next highest parts, and then the fourth horn will play the lowest parts. And so it's a little bit dovetailed, first, third, second, and then fourth in terms of highest to lowest. That's kind of orchestral tradition, and in his orchestration textbook, Sam Adler will try to convince you that it's because two horns who are sitting next to each other trying to play high notes will interfere with each other and make each other crack notes. I don't know where that myth came from. People will crack notes just because it's hard not to crack notes in the high register, but it's really just it's evolved out of the fact that a lot of times composers who are writing for fourth horn for four players will this particularly in the 19th century, they might write the first and second horn in F with their F crooks, and then they'll write third and fourth horn in a different key, in C, for example, with a C crook. And so you've got a high and low horn in F and a high and low horn in C. And so because of that, it's just kind of grown into this sort of unusual dovetailed seating where you've got high, low, and then high and low. In a horn quartet, in general, whoever's playing the first horn part tends to specialize in high range playing, and actually first and third horns are considered high horns. And if you're writing for a larger ensemble, like 6 horns or 8 horns, then the odd numbered horns are going to be your high horns, and your even numbered horns, 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, are going to be your low horns. And for whoever's playing lead tends to specialize in higher range playing. And so they're the ones that you're going to want to assign. If you're going to write in the extreme high register, you're going to want to write it in the first horn part. Likewise, fourth horn, I love playing fourth horn. Fourth horn tends to have the lowest notes and specialize in low range playing. And so the extreme high and extreme low notes should be assigned to first horn and fourth horn players. If you've got a high D and you give it to the second horn player, it's less likely they're going to be able to play it. But if you've got a high D in the first horn part, they will have a better chance of being able to hit that. Safer to stay away from high Ds, but if you're going to write a high D, put it in the first horn part. And if you're going to write, for example, this is fairly standard territory. All horn players should be able to play a low C, and even down to like a low A. A horn player who's even a high horn specialist who's worth his money is going to be able to play down to at least to like a low A or low G. This range, like the G, F, and E, tends to be low horn specialist territory, and especially even lower than that. Now, all of this being said, this doesn't mean that you should always, like in a string quartet, in a horn quartet, just because first horn tends to play higher parts, this doesn't mean that they should always have the melody, nor does it always mean that they should always be playing the highest notes. And you'll see a lot of effective quartet writing will give the first horn player a break by having them play a lower part, like maybe something in the mid-range, while maybe the third horn or even the second or fourth horn will take some of the higher notes, in order to balance it out and make it so that way the poor first horn player isn't playing all of the high notes all the time. And plus, with a horn quartet, really you need to think about it not as SATB necessarily, but you want to think about it as you're writing for 4 soloists. And so it's really nice to pass the melody around between members of the ensemble, give the second horn a chance to have the melody for a little bit, then pass it on to maybe the fourth horn have the melody for a little bit. You're really, one of the nice things about writing for a horn ensemble is that you're writing for, it's a homogeneous ensemble. You're writing for 4 of the same instruments who all have the same range, and so there's lots of room for overlap, and lots of room for stuff to just kind of get passed around the ensemble. First horn might have passage that starts high and goes down into low register, and then the second horn might echo that, and then the third horn will echo that, and so stuff gets passed around all the time in horn writing, in quartet writing. I've mentioned this before, but even in a quartet, it's important to do your best not to have everyone playing all the time. Give each person a break every now and then, and this is effective both in terms of giving the players a break and giving them a chance to empty their water, but also it works well texturally from a compositional standpoint. Sometimes it's nice to reduce the texture a little bit and just have a solo for a little bit, or have 2 players playing a duet for a little bit, and you want to give each player a chance to rest and each player a chance to showcase a little bit. Any other questions so far before I show a couple of demonstration pieces? How are we doing on time? We're at 8:45. Can I show just one piece real quick? So this is a piece that I wrote last year, and it was a little bit of an experiment for me. I hadn't actually written for horn ensemble before, and this piece is titled Great Lumbering Mechanical Monstrosity. We premiered this piece with our quartet last spring, and I learned some things. I learned some of the things that I've been telling you now, like don't have everyone playing all the time and give people a break every now and then. This piece ended up being a little more challenging than I was hoping for. I was shooting for kind of an undergraduate horn ensemble level, and overshot it a little bit. Whoops. But give it a listen and let me know what you think and what you notice about the scoring with this piece. I've got a score here. Can you all hear this okay? Yeah, so Some things worked. Um, the some things were quite a bit harder than I anticipated. What wanted to hear some of your thoughts on what you saw in the scoring.
Well, the thing that leaps out right at the beginning is that you're avoiding repeated notes in the same instrument. So you have you're alternating between steps. I don't know whether that's to have a more melodic, uh, sort of a more melodic conception. Maybe that's easier for a horn player to make, or easier for a player to make musical. Here you have it in the staccatos,
Hmm.
rather than just repeating the same notes, you're doing this alternating thing. And then later on, you have it in these triplets where it seems to make a smoother articulation maybe than a repetition on the same pitch would.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe that's just kind of a personal little quirk. It's something that I like to play around with. There's, you certainly can, especially if you slur, um, uh, if you've got two parts that are slurring and alternating pitches, um, then it's the kind of this neat timbral effect. It's a very smooth connected sound that you can't necessarily get by just repeating each note. Um,
Right.
and and each each horn player, as much as we try to match uh, sound and match timbre and articulation, each individual player has a little bit different of a sound, um, and so having us kind of switch back and forth gives a little bit more texture uh, um, to what would otherwise just be kind of repeated notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's just kind of a I don't know if it's necessarily more or less effective when writing for horn, but it's something a trick that I like to use.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Uh, Other thoughts or things you notice, Mary?
Oh, it's just a couple of things that stood out to me. I was worried about horn four till about midway, thinking, gee, this poor player is not getting a break. But later I felt the same thing about horn three. But finally there was. And I would just think in terms of endurance. I mean, this is something I don't know about. If you had to choose a long piece, it's more sustained notes versus staccato, and the difference that they're both demanding of breathing, uh, which is more difficult. But beyond that, I also want to say I love something you did on page 15. There's some really beautiful effect. I think it was page 15. It almost reminded me of pocketing. Yeah, at
Yeah.
185. That was really lovely. And I also loved the little kind of fugue you were doing, or the echoing of the fugue. That was just really nice in the writing. There was like just a newness, and I enjoyed both of those things very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that effect also turned out to be harder to pull off than I thought it would be.
I
The,
could have
the,
guessed
syn-
that.
the syncopation
Yeah, the
aspect.
syncopation between the two horn parts.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really beautiful though. It just sounded like a really different sound to me.
yeah, um, and you know this sort of thing I did both to get a little bit of a timbre shift here, but also in order to give whoever was playing the higher of the two parts a little bit of a break. But I have them switch here. Um, so now horn four is taking the higher bit, and horn three is taking the lower bit. Um, and so again, gave horn three a little bit of a break, so they're not on the high part the whole time, and gives a little bit of a timbre shift as the because the two horns have a slightly different timbre to them. Um, about your comment about endurance, I mean, the endurance was certainly an issue with this piece. This was a fairly difficult piece to power through, just because I didn't give my players enough rest. Um, Now, something to keep in mind is that giving players rest is especially important for the high horns. Um, Fourth horn when we're down there on fourth horns, basically we like to pretend to be a bass trombone. We're used to just kind of powering away down there on the low notes. And it's still important for us to take a break every now and then, mostly just because things just start to kind of get muddy down there if we're playing too long. But we don't need quite as much rest time as the high horn players do. If I'm playing in a quartet rehearsal and we get done with maybe a 2-hour rehearsal, and the high horn players are just like, oh, yep, I'm done, I'm toast. And I'm just like, come on, guys, we can keep going. I got another 2 hours left in me. I could do this all day. And that's just because the nature, high range stuff tends to be more taxing. In terms of your other question as well, I mean, sustained stuff, especially high register sustained stuff, can be very tiring. If you ask someone to hold high F on the top of the staff for forever, that player's going to wear out very quickly. Even though that's not technically, or even if you ask someone to hold a C in the staff for a very long time, before too long, that person's going to wear out. Even though it's not in the high range, it's still kind of up there, and it's still taxing especially to sustain fortissimo up in that range for a very long time. The last page of Sibelius 2 is the worst offender. He's got all 4 horns repeating this syncopated dum bum bum, and it's just an A, but it's like a fortissimo A for forever, like an entire page. And it's just like, come on, Sibelius. And whenever we get stuff like that, we'll even like take turns dropping out and giving each other breaks, because sustained stuff like that is very taxing. Something that's more staccato and something that's more light and staccato, we can generally last a little bit longer on that. But again, just in general, it's still important to give the players a break every now and then. And again, that's something that I needed to do more of in this piece. You could tell by the end that high B flat did not come out at the end. So the ending wasn't quite as impressive as I'd hoped, just because we were tired. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so what's with the chords?
Yeah, no, good question. I scored this piece so that way it could be played by a quartet or an octet.
Okay.
And so I've got...
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so we played it with just a quartet, but it could be played where you just double each part. Fifth horn would play the first horn part, and so, or you could just have them playing side by side, 2 people playing first part, 2 people playing second part, and they would just double on unison for most of it, except for those moments where, yeah, I wrote some chords in there, included some divisi, and that's where the higher of the 2 would go to the high part and the lower, part.
I sense. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's kind of a lazy way of writing an octet, but that could also be.
Well, I sense an analogy to vocal writing again. You know, where you might have a SATB that's mostly 4 voices, but they split into divisi for special situations.
Absolutely. And
I'm sorry, I missed my point, which is that when you've got 2 on the same part, there's a steadiness to it, right? They reinforce each other and help each other out. So especially for a difficult piece, that can be a good move, I would think.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily recommend writing this way as a quartet that can be played by an octet. If you're going to write for a larger ensemble, it's a little bit nicer to have them be, you can certainly do a certain amount of doubling, and that's something that happens a lot in octet music, is that maybe in order to get more power on a certain line, you might have 3 or 4 horns playing unison
Mhm.
on a certain line. Um, and but if you write them as 8 parts individually, then it gives more opportunity for you to give each player a break.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Uh, or more opportunity for you to reinforce certain parts when it's needed. If I were to write this piece again and really score it for 8 horns, it would look a little bit different. It would I would divvy things up a little bit differently, where so to give each individual horn player a little bit more of a break.
Mm.
There are certain passages in here that are a little more delicate that I wouldn't necessarily want horns doubled up on.
Mhm, mhm.
And there's certain passages like this moment where second and fourth have this bomb, 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 bum, 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 bum. I would definitely want more horns on those, on each of those, just because it can be kind of tough to carry power through all of this stuff, and that was certainly some place where it's like, yeah, I could have used a buddy or two to help reinforce that.
Yeah, these orchestration kinds of considerations.
Definitely, definitely. Other thoughts or things you noticed?
Just the clarity of all, the articulations that you wanted. It was very, very clear. I appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a balance with composing between being hyper specific and writing too much information to the point where it gets distracting, and writing not enough information.
This felt necessary in this. I had the feeling.
What's that?
This felt necessary. It doesn't feel like it was micromanaging.
Right. If you want a specific sound, then yeah, of course, tell us what you want. Oftentimes, if you've got like passages like this, I maybe didn't necessarily need to write every single staccato on here. I could have just written staccato, the word staccato, and just had the repeated notes, and the message probably would have gotten across just as well. But certainly, these accents with the sforzando, where I wanted those hits to, there's kind of a Rite of Spring like moment, bum 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 bum. Where I wanted those to really stick out. That was definitely necessary to put in there.
I imagine this was a very exciting performance.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah. We didn't get quite as big of a crowd as I'd hoped for this performance. There were only like 10 or so people in the audience, but it was still a lot of fun to put together.
Well, they certainly seemed to enjoy it. That was a nice hand. It sounded like a lot of applause at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it was a small but appreciative crowd. Any other questions that you guys might have about the horn and writing for the horn?
Certainly. Learned a few things.
I have
Say that again, Xelana? I'm sorry, Xelana, say that one more time.
Oh, I just said I've certainly learned a few things. Thanks a lot. I feel like good.
Excellent. I'm glad it was helpful.
Oh yeah, this was wonderful. Kind of underscored some things I knew, and then learning some new things. Really, really appreciate it. And I'd love to think that I could reach out to you sometime when I'm in my ignorance again.
Absolutely, yeah. If you guys have any questions, or if you want me to try something out and be like, hey, is this possible? I'm happy to play through some things and try some stuff out.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
thank you, David. Really, really informative.
I have a question more on about Hornucopia, the upcoming um, concert, that we're planning for
Yeah.
later on. Was that, it seems like it was going to be possibly a larger than a quartet. Do you have any more information on whether it's going to be quartet or octet?
We're gonna focus and put preference on quartets, but we might consider like an octet piece or two. Um, uh, start, um, obviously putting together a larger ensemble takes more people and more coordination. Um, so I don't imagine we would do more than like one or two octet pieces, or more than one or two pieces larger than a quartet for this concert. Um, and so it's a possibility, but we're mostly going to be focusing on quartet music for the concert. Yeah.
And I think it will be indoors or outdoors.
Probably it'll be an indoor concert. We've booked the St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Salem, and they've I've been there once before. They've got really good acoustics in there. It's not like super wet and washy, but it's got a nice reverberation to it. Yeah, writing for outdoors is certainly its own beast.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I just want to say I really do appreciate this, and I doubly appreciate that even though you're a player, you might have fallen into a few of the same traps of don't have everybody play all the time. That's the real take home for me. The one thing I wrote for Brass Quintet, the little admonishment at the end was that very thing. And I did, write down what you said, reduce the texture at time or have two players playing a duet. Because if you hear things in your mind, like 4-part harmony, as I do, and then it feels like, oh, well, this is a slam dunk. This is perfect for 4 instruments.
Right.
You don't want them playing all the time, even what fits under the hand for piano, or you could imagine it could work well for strings. So it's really something for me to take to heart, and that it could also happen to you,
Yes,
even though you're
indeed,
experienced.
indeed.
Yeah.
Well, along that line, you hear people describe string quartet as a conversation between the instruments. And so a conversation, naturally, not everybody's going to be talking all at the same time, except, maybe in a Zoom meeting. But I'm just wondering to what degree you feel that same feeling or attitude should carry over to a horn quartet,
Oh,
or if
absolutely.
there's a significant difference.
No, I think that's exactly right.
A good way to think about it.
You know, like I mentioned earlier, treating them as 4 soloists and soloists that can have a conversation with each other. While they tend to have those roles of high horn versus low horn, high horn, low horn. By no means do they have to stay in those roles, and it's really, it's 4 of the same instrument, which each have basically the same range, and so there's plenty of room for conversation, for passing ideas around, and plenty of room for you're right. It's difficult to if you're thinking in 4-part harmonies, it's difficult to imagine it as anything but just a 4-part chorale texture, which can sound really lovely, but sometimes reducing that to just a solo for just a moment, or even just I've seen it a lot where a single idea, unaccompanied, a solo idea will appear in one horn, and then the next horn will just echo that idea, and then the third horn will echo it, and then the fourth horn will echo it. Each, it's still a solo line, unaccompanied, but it's getting passed from one horn to the other. Or there's plenty of room for like call and response sorts of textures. Maybe first horn plays a melody and then the rest of the horns respond with something. Then maybe second horn might play a melody and the rest of the horns respond to that. Then third horn plays a melody and the rest of the horns respond to that. So there's lots of room for playing around with different textures that aren't just a four-part chorale.
Thank you. So, I was listening to the third quartet by Cary Turner, I think his name is.
Yes, actually, we're learning that quartet right now.
Okay. And I don't really want us to have to, I know we're probably near the end of our time, but in the first movement, I wasn't looking at the score. I was just listening to it on YouTube. There was this, what seemed like very fast background figuration going on in the first movement where it may be scale passages, but not necessarily, and very soft. It just seemed very fast. And I just wondered if that was very difficult.
Yeah, let's look at that. I think I know exactly what part you're talking about. I had this pulled up as another option for something that we could take a listen to, because it's really effective writing for horn quartet. Cary Turner's really famous in the horn world. He's also got a really effective concerto for low horn, which is specifically designed for someone like me who specializes in low horn playing. He actually stole some of the ideas from his low horn concerto for this quartet, or the other way around, maybe. Yeah, this. Yeah, I think it's this bit here.
It's being swapped around a lot. I can see that now.
Yeah, and scoring things in octaves is also a really effective scoring technique. You can see here the first horn and the fourth horn have this little noodly passage. And then, as you said, yeah, it gets passed around. If it were just one horn player trying to play all of these chromatic passages all the way through, that would be quite difficult to sustain, both just in terms of mental energy, and in terms of breathing, and in terms of chops. But you can see that he's passed it around. Now the third horn picks it up for just a little bit, and then the first horn picks it up again, then the third horn again.
And it was very, very soft, so it was very effective background. And it was interesting to listen to, but it was definitely background to what was going on in the foreground.
Yeah, definitely.
It's that it was passed around so much.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that particular moment, because it's a nice moment. It's probably about this is close enough. This part here, that part's kind of hard. But it's cool. It's cool, and it works. It's effective. But yeah, I mean, this stuff is it's kind of difficult, but it's made easier by the fact that it's getting passed around between members of the ensemble. This part here is just plain hard, but it's super fun.
Yeah, that was fun to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a wow.
This one wasn't us playing it. We're still learning this quartet. This was the Rotterdam Philharmonic Chamber players, who were just fantastic players.
Glad to see this music.
Say it one more time, Xelana.
Oh, I just said thank you. It was good to see the music. It clarified it a lot. So
Yeah, absolutely. I can send you the score as well, if you're interested in doing a little bit of score study.
can I get it online, do you think? Or do you just have a PDF of it? That'd be good. Yeah, I'd like
Yeah,
to.
I can just send you a PDF. Or, I mean, you can get it online, but you have to pay for it. But yeah, I can send you a copy.
Accept the offer. I was very impressed with it. And I didn't listen to the whole thing yet, so. And I've also found is it Shrapnine, the Russian composer? It's some
Yes.
they're
He's got a,
beautiful.
yeah, he's got a set of 6 horn quartets, and it's beautiful writing, beautiful.
Really, really gorgeous lyrical stuff.
I would love to have a copy of this also to look at if it's okay.
Yeah, Jeff, can I send this to you and you can forward it to those who are present today, or?
Sure.
Or actually, I might be able to. Let me see if I can just stick it in that.
I'm not sure.
Oh, yep, I might be able to. Oh, come on.
I don't know that I have a list of who is here, so.
Okay, why don't I do this right now then? I can go ahead and stop share at this point, but let me just email this to you all right now. Xelana, what's your email?
ISC01 at notimemusic.com.
Okay, ISC
01
01
at notimemusic.
at notimemusic.com. Okay, so that was ISC01 as in 01 at notimemusic.com.
Correct.
All right, and Mary, what was your email?
I'll give you my easy one. It's just Mary Feynman, FINEMAN at AOL.com.
No punctuation or anything between, just Mary Feynman?
No.
At AOL.com?
Yeah.
All right, and Jeff and Kevin, I'll email this to you as well.
Thank you.
I'll also include a copy of the of my quartet, in case you wanted to do some study of that one as well.
And also
Yeah.
that first slide you had of the ranges with your
Yeah, I'll send a link to these slides as well.
Thank you.
But yeah, the Shrapnine quartets are also just gorgeous writing, something that would be worth looking into. What's his name? Shoot, what's his name? Let me, okay. One thing at a time. Okay. Lowell Shaw has a collection of pieces called fripperies. Let me post that in the chat as well. those are they're fun little like jazz inspired pieces that are just also a really great example of effective quartet writing. He does a whole lot of passing melodies around between the horns, and they're also not terribly hard. So the Lulshaw fripperies are worth looking into. Paul Hindemith has a challenging but really interesting horn quartet, sonata for four horns. What's the guy's name? Not Cesar Chavez, but Carlos Chavez.
Cesar Franck? No.
What's that?
You said Cesar, so I thought Franck. I don't know.
No, not Cesar Franck. Carlos Chavez.
Yeah, that's it.
Has a sonata for four horns that's also really interesting. All right. And I will finish sending this email to you guys. But thank you guys so much for listening and attending tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, David.
It's really wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Hello.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.